The call came in on a Wednesday, which matters only because Wednesdays were when Danielle and I did inventory at the warehouse, not a real warehouse. A repurposed loading bay behind the Teton County Search and Rescue Building in Jackson, Wyoming, where we cataloged equipment returns, logged GPS unit battery levels, and replaced the water purification tablets that volunteers always forgot to use. It was the least dramatic part of the job. I liked it for that reason. Danielle was the team coordinator. I was her deputy, which in practice meant I did the same work she did, but got paid $11,000 less per year. We had 14 active volunteers and access to a shared helicopter through an agreement with Sublette County that was renegotiated every fiscal year by people who had never been on a mountain. The team covered a region roughly the size of Delaware. Most of it was vertical. I had been doing the job for 4 years. Before that, I taught 8th grade earth science in Lander for 6 years. And before that, I was finishing a geology degree at the University of Wyoming that I started 4 years later than most people because I'd spent my early 20s doing seasonal trail work for the Forest Service and not thinking very hard about the future. I was 41. My knees hurt in weather. I owned a truck I couldn't afford to fix and rented a 2-bedroom house in town with my partner, Ava, who managed the bookkeeping for a rafting outfitter and was 7 months into trying to get pregnant through a process that had made our bathroom look like a pharmacy and our savings account look like a wound. I mention all of this because when I tell you what happened that September, I need you to understand that I was not someone who had spare capacity for obsession. I was tired in the way that people in their early 40s are tired, not dramatically, not poetically, just consistently. I went to bed at 10 and woke at 5:30 and spent the hours between doing things that needed doing. I did not have a void that needed filling. I had a life that was full in the ways that make you forget to ask whether it's the right one. The call was from dispatch at the Bridger-Teton National Forest. A party of 4 had failed to check out at the Seneca Lake trailhead in the Wind River Range. They'd reserved a backcountry permit for 5 nights entering Saturday, exiting Wednesday, and the ranger who checked the trailhead log that morning found their vehicle still in the lot. No exit signature, no contact. The protocol at this stage was notification, not mobilization. People run late. People change routes. People forget to sign out. Dispatch was informing us as a courtesy because the weather window was closing and a front was expected Thursday night that would drop temperatures into the low 20s above 10,000 feet. Danielle took the call. I heard her side of it while I was stacking helmets. She asked the standard questions: names, permit details, planned route, vehicle description, emergency contacts. She wrote it all on the intake form. We used a photocopied sheet I'd designed myself 3 years earlier. After we lost 40 minutes on a search because someone had written a GPS coordinate in the wrong datum, I was quietly proud of that form. It had saved us real time. The party was 2 couples, Ben and Maya Oshiro from Boise, Lena Marsh and Carlos Dominguez from Salt Lake, all late 20s to early 30s. The permit route was a loop, up the Seneca Lake Trail, over to Island Lake, then south through a high basin called Titcomb, and back out through the Elkhart Park area. It was a well-traveled route, popular, not technical. The kind of trip people plan for a year and post about afterward. By Wednesday evening, dispatch had made contact with the emergency numbers. Ben Oshiro's sister in Boise confirmed that the group had not been heard from since Saturday afternoon, when Maya had sent a photograph from the trailhead parking lot, 4 people with packs. Smiling, sky so blue it looked digital. No one had expected communication after that. The winds don't have cell coverage beyond the first mile. Thursday morning, Danielle and I drove to the trailhead with Paul Fenn, our most experienced volunteer. Paul was 63, retired BLM, had been doing search and rescue since before it had an acronym in Teton County. He didn't say much. He noticed everything. I trusted his read on terrain the way I trusted my own read on rock, not because he was always right, but because when he was wrong, he knew it immediately. The vehicle was a silver Subaru Outback with Idaho plates. It was locked. There was a layer of dust on it consistent with 5 or 6 days of sitting in an exposed gravel lot. A pine needle had fallen into the gap between the hood and the windshield and was half buried in dried sap. The trailhead register showed their entry on Saturday at 10:40 a.m. Ben Oshiro's handwriting. 4 names, the date, their planned route. Nothing unusual. We hiked in. The weather was still holding cool, clear, the aspen just starting to turn in the lower drainages. The trail was in good condition. We passed 2 parties coming out, both of whom had entered Monday or Tuesday. Neither had seen the Oshiro Marsh group. That wasn't remarkable. The basin was large, the trails branching enough that you could go days without seeing another party if your timing was offset by a few hours. We reached Seneca Lake by early afternoon. It was beautiful in the way that the winds are always beautiful. Severe, mineral, the water, a color that doesn't exist at lower elevations. We checked the established campsites along the eastern shore. 2 were occupied by other parties. 3 were empty. None showed signs of recent use beyond what the current occupants had left. At Island Lake, nothing. At the upper basin below, Titcomb, nothing. We talked to every party we encountered, 11 people total over 2 days. No one had seen the group, no one had found abandoned gear, no one had heard distress signals or seen flares or noticed anything that would indicate an emergency. On Friday afternoon, the front arrived. We retreated to the trailhead and called in the full team. By Saturday, 1 week after the group had entered, we had 12 people in the field, a dog team from Fremont County, and the shared helicopter doing visual sweeps of the upper basins when the ceiling allowed it. The search area was defined by their permit route, plus a 2-mile buffer in every direction, which gave us roughly 60 square miles of wilderness above 9,000 feet. Much of it was talus, cliff face, snowfield, and lake. The kind of terrain that hides a body in plain sight. We searched for 6 days. I need to be specific about what that means because I think people picture search and rescue as a dramatic, continuous thing. Helicopters wheeling, dogs baying, teams fanning out with purpose. It's not. It's grid work. It's walking a line through a drainage with 12 feet between you and the next person, eyes on the ground, calling out every 30 seconds, marking your GPS track, doing it again. It's coming back to base camp at dark and eating a cold meal and studying maps with headlamps and reallocating sectors based on probability models that are only as good as the assumptions you feed them. It's knowing that every hour that passes reduces the survivability window and doing the math on that window every morning and not saying the number out loud. We found nothing. Not nothing in the sense that we found no bodies. Nothing in the absolute sense. No gear, no clothing, no food wrappers, no boot prints in the mud, no tent platforms in the duff, no fire rings, no water filter residue, no toilet paper flags, no bear hang ropes, no scuff marks on rock. Nothing that indicated 4 human beings with 60-pound packs had ever set foot beyond the trailhead. Paul was the first to say it out loud on the 3rd day. We were at the mobile command post, a pop-up canopy near the trailhead with folding tables and a radio, and he was looking at the map with his reading glasses pushed down his nose, and he said, "They didn't camp." I looked at him. 6 days in, and we haven't found a single campsite. Not a used one, not an abandoned one. 4 people, 5 nights. They would have set up camp somewhere, even if they got hurt on the first day, even if they fell into a lake. There would be something, a wrapper, a boot print, something. He tapped the map. They signed in at the trailhead, and then they weren't here. Danielle, who was on the radio with the Forest Service, looked over but didn't comment. She'd heard Paul say things like this before. He had a tendency toward declarative statements that sounded mystical, but were actually just blunt empirical observations. He wasn't saying anything supernatural. He was saying that the evidence didn't support the premise that these people had hiked the route they'd registered for. They could have gone off trail, I said. 4 people, off trail, in the winds, with a 5-day permit for a standard loop. Why? People change plans. People who change plans still leave boot prints. I didn't argue. He was right. I'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't committed to saying it. Because saying it meant acknowledging that our search area might be wrong, and acknowledging that meant we'd spent 3 days looking in the wrong place while the window closed. On day 4, we expanded the search area. On day 5, the Forest Service brought in a second dog team from Montana. On day 6, the dogs alerted once at a point roughly a mile and a half off the main trail in a drainage that led down to a chain of unnamed lakes below the Continental Divide. The handler, a woman named Gwen, whose last name I've forgotten, said the alert was diffuse, not the tight, certain signal you get when a dog hits decomposition or a concentrated scent trail, but a broad, directionless interest. The dog kept circling, nose up, unable to resolve the scent into a bearing. We gridded that drainage with every available person. 2 full days. Nothing. The search was suspended on the following Friday, 13 days after the group entered and 9 days after we'd begun looking. The suspension was standard protocol. We hadn't found evidence of the party beyond the trailhead. The weather had turned. The survivability window for an uninjured, properly equipped party was already passed. For an injured party, it had been passed since day 3. I wrote the suspension report. It was 4 pages long. I noted the sectors searched, the methods employed, the resources deployed, and the findings, which took 1 sentence. No physical evidence of the missing party was located beyond the Seneca Lake trailhead. The families came to Jackson. Ben's sister, Keiko. Maya's parents, who had flown from Honolulu. Lena's mother, who drove from Salt Lake alone. Carlos's brother, who looked so much like the photograph on the missing poster that I had to leave the room the first time I saw him. Danielle handled the family briefings. I sat in on 2 of them. I watched Keiko Oshiro listen to our operations summary, with her hands flat on the table, not crying, not interrupting, just absorbing the information with a precision that I recognized because I do the same thing when I'm trying not to come apart. At the end, she asked one question. How is it possible that 4 people with 70 days combined outdoor experience just vanished without a trace on a popular trail? Danielle gave the honest answer. We didn't know. 2 weeks after the suspension, I went back. I need to be clear about this. It was not authorized. The search was suspended, which meant no team resources, no volunteer deployment, no GPS, tracking through official channels. Going back was not a disciplinary violation. I was a private citizen on public land and could hike wherever I wanted on my own time. But it was understood inside the team that continued personal involvement after suspension was a sign that someone hadn't processed the outcome. Danielle would have told me not to go. I didn't tell Danielle. I told Ava I was going backpacking for the weekend. She looked at me the way she'd been looking at me for 2 weeks, careful, calibrated, not quite asking the question. She knew which case it was. She knew I wasn't sleeping well. She also knew that I was an adult who managed risk for a living and that trying to stop me from doing something I'd decided to do was an exercise that cost more energy than it saved. She said, "Take the satellite communicator?" I took it. I drove to the trailhead on a Saturday morning in early October. The lot was empty. The Subaru was gone. The family had retrieved it. The register showed sparse traffic. The season was over. The aspen were past peak, the leaves brown and curling, the sky the kind of pale blue that means the warmth is leaving and not coming back. I hiked to the drainage where the dog had alerted. I'd been thinking about Paul's observation that the group hadn't camped, and I'd been thinking about the dog's diffuse alert, and I'd been thinking about something I hadn't mentioned in the suspension report because I didn't have language for it, and because including it would have made me sound unserious. During the search, on the 5th day, I had been working a sector alone. This happens, the grid requires it, and the terrain sometimes narrows to the point where 2 people side by side is inefficient. I was in a talus field on the eastern slope of a ridge that separated 2 unnamed drainages. The talus was the usual Wind River granite, big, angular blocks, some of them the size of cars, stacked at the angle of repose. Hard walking, loud, because every step shifted something. I stopped to check my GPS and eat a handful of almonds, and in the silence after I stopped moving, I heard something. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't an animal. It was a sound I recognized from my geology work, a resonance. Low, felt more than heard. Like the sound a large rock makes when it's stressed but hasn't fractured yet. Geologists call it acoustic emission. It's the sound of potential energy becoming kinetic in increments too small to see. I'd heard it in quarries and road cuts. I'd never heard it in an open talus field. It lasted about 4 seconds and then stopped. I stood there for a while. The wind was calm. Nothing moved. I marked my GPS coordinates, noted the time, 2:47 p.m., and continued my grid. I did not report it because there was nothing to report. A sound in the mountains? The mountains make sounds. But I thought about it. I thought about it at night, lying next to Ava, listening to her breathe, running my thumb along the hem of the sheet, the way I do when I can't sleep. I thought about where I'd been standing when I heard it. I thought about the fact that the dog had alerted a quarter mile from that spot in the same drainage. I thought about the diffuse quality of the alert, the dog unable to find a direction. I thought about the word diffuse. I reached the drainage by noon on that October Saturday. The weather was clear and cold low 40s, wind out of the west, no clouds. The drainage was a typical glacial feature, U-shaped, steep-walled, a chain of small lakes connected by a braided stream that was already running low with the season. The bottom was a mix of meadow, willow thicket, and boulder field. The upper end terminated in a circle wall about 800 feet high. I set up my tent near the lowest lake, ate lunch, and then hiked to the talus field where I'd heard the sound. The field was exactly as I remembered it. Granite blocks ranging from basketball-sized to room-sized, gray and orange with lichen. Some of them perched in ways that looked temporary, even though they'd probably been sitting that way since the Pleistocene. I stood approximately where I'd stood during the search, according to my GPS. I waited. Wind, water, a Clark's nutcracker somewhere in the trees below. Nothing else. I spent 3 hours in that talus field. I moved through it systematically, the way I would have during the search, but slower, more carefully. I wasn't looking for the missing party anymore. I was looking for the thing that had made the sound. I didn't find it. But I found something else. Near the upper edge of the talus, where the loose rock met the solid cliff face of the ridge, there was an opening. Not a cave, a gap between two massive blocks that had come to rest against the cliff in a way that created a narrow slot, maybe 2 feet wide and 5 feet tall. It went back into darkness. The air coming out of it was warm. I need to stop here and tell you what warm air coming out of a rock formation means in a geological context, because this is important and I don't want you to think I was being dramatic. In karst terrain, limestone, dolomite warm air from underground is common. Caves maintain a constant temperature year-round, and when the outside air is colder than the cave air, the warm air rises and exits through any available opening. It's basic thermodynamics. The Wind River Range is not karst. It's Archean granite and gneiss, some of the oldest exposed rock in North America. Granite does not form caves through dissolution. It can form joints and fractures through tectonic stress, and those fractures can open into voids. But those voids are typically small, unstable, and not connected to any thermal system that would produce a consistent warm airflow. The air coming out of that slot was warm. Not hot, not steaming, just measurably warmer than the ambient temperature. I held my hand in front of the gap and felt it a gentle, steady exhalation. Like the rock was breathing out, I shined my headlamp into the slot. The walls were granite, rough, no moisture. The slot narrowed after about 6 feet and turned. I couldn't see beyond the turn. I did not go in. I went back to my tent, ate dinner, and sat by the lake until dark. The stars came out with the violence they always have at elevation, not twinkling, but burning. The Milky Way, a physical stripe across the sky. I thought about the slot. I thought about the warm air. I thought about the 4 people who had signed a register and then stopped existing. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I hiked back to the talus. The air was still flowing from the slot. I'd brought a thermometer, a basic digital one from the first aid kit, and I measured the air inside the gap at 52 degrees. The ambient air was 29. A 23-degree differential coming from inside granite at 11,000 feet in October. I put my head into the slot and listened. Nothing at first, then very faint, very low, that same sound. The acoustic emission, the pre-fracture resonance, except it wasn't quite the same. It had a rhythm to it, Not regular, not mechanical, but patterned, rising and falling over intervals of maybe 8 to 10 seconds. Like breathing, but I want to be careful with that comparison because I was already primed to think in terms of breathing by the warm air. And confirmation bias is real. And I knew that then. I pulled my head out. I sat on a rock. I ate an energy bar and drank some water and looked at the mountains across the valley and tried to think clearly. 4 people had vanished. A dog had alerted a quarter mile from this spot. The rock was making a sound. The rock was exhaling warm air. This was not a mystery I was equipped to solve. I was a search and rescue deputy with a bachelor's degree in geology and a truck that needed a transmission. I was not a spelunker, not a volcanologist, not a geophysicist. The correct action was to report the geological anomaly to the Forest Service, note the GPS coordinates, and let qualified people investigate. I took a photograph of the slot. I recorded 30 seconds of audio on my phone, holding it inside the gap, though I wasn't confident the sound would register on a phone microphone. I marked the coordinates. I hiked out Sunday afternoon and drove home. On Monday morning, I called the Bridger-Teton District Ranger's office and reported what I'd found. I spoke to a man named Dale Purcell, who was the acting natural resources officer. I described the slot, the warm air, the sound, and the coordinates. I was careful to frame it as a geological observation, not a search and rescue lead. Because the search was suspended, and I didn't want to create confusion. Dale listened politely. He said he'd pass it along. He asked if I had entered the formation. I said no. He said good. 2 days later, Danielle called me into her office. It was a small room with a metal desk and a window that looked onto the parking lot, and she had the overhead fluorescent turned off because she hated it, so the only light came from the window and her desk lamp. She looked tired. She usually looked tired. The job did that. Dale Purcell called me, she said. I nodded. He said you found a geological feature in the search area and reported it. He wanted to know if it was related to the Oshiro case. I told him it was an observation. You went back in, on your own, after suspension. On my own time, public land. She looked at me for a long moment. Danielle was 54, black, originally from Denver, and had been running this team for 11 years. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was reading a page you hadn't written yet. Marcus, she said, and paused. I understand the impulse. I do, but I need you to hear what I'm about to say. Okay. The search is suspended. The case is open but not active. The Forest Service may resume it in the spring if conditions allow. What they will not do is send a geology team to an 11,000-foot talus field in October based on warm air and a sound. I'm not asking them to. You reported it to the Natural Resources Office. What were you expecting? I didn't answer because the honest answer that I didn't know, that I'd reported it because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because not reporting it felt like holding something I shouldn't hold alone, would have made me sound exactly like the kind of person she was worried I was becoming. I need you here, she said. Present, functional. We have 3 months of off-season work, a budget proposal due in November, and 14 volunteers who need recertification by January. I need you doing that, not hiking into closed search areas chasing sounds. The area isn't closed. The search is suspended, not... Marcus, I stopped. I'm asking you to let this one go. I said I would. I didn't. What I did was start researching, not the disappearance, the geology. I spent evenings at the kitchen table with my laptop while Ava watched television in the next room, reading about thermal anomalies in granitic formations. There wasn't much. Most of the literature dealt with geothermal systems in volcanic or extensional terrains, Yellowstone, the Basin, and Range. The Wind Rivers were a different animal entirely. A laramide, uplift, ancient crystalline basement rock, no volcanism for hundreds of millions of years. There was no known mechanism for a thermal anomaly in that setting. I found 3 papers. One was a 1987 USGS survey that noted anomalous thermal flux in a single borehole in the northern winds, attributed to deep fluid circulation along basement fractures. One was a 2004 master's thesis from a University of Wyoming student who had mapped fracture networks in the range and noted, in passing, that several blowholes, natural ventilation features in fractured rock, had been reported by climbers but never systematically studied. The third was a 2012 conference abstract by a geophysicist at Montana State named Priya Chandrasekaran, who had used passive seismic methods to identify what she called resonant void structures in the Precambrian basement of the Wind River Range. Resonant void structures. The phrase sat in my chest like a stone. I emailed Dr. Chandrasekaran. I identified myself, described my background, described what I'd found, and asked if she had any published follow-up to her 2012 abstract. I was careful. Professional. I didn't mention the missing hikers. She responded the next day. She said the project had not been funded beyond the initial survey. She said the data she'd collected suggested the presence of extensive void networks at depth in the Archean granite, connected to the surface through fracture systems, and that some of these voids appeared to be thermally active. She said the resonance signatures she'd recorded were complex and not fully characterized. She offered to look at my coordinates on her existing datasets if I wanted to send them. I sent them. That night, Ava and I ate dinner together at the kitchen table. She'd made pasta with roasted vegetables, which was what she made when she was tired, and we ate mostly in silence. The house was warm, the windows were dark. October in Jackson means full dark by 7, and the cold comes in through the window frames in a way you can feel with your shoulders even before you feel it with your skin. You're still thinking about it, she said. Thinking about what? She gave me a look. Yeah, I said. Can you tell me what? Specifically? I described the slot, the warm air, the sound, the geology that didn't make sense. I was halfway through the explanation of thermal flux in crystalline basement when she held up her hand. I mean, what's driving you? Not the facts. What's underneath the facts? Ava was better at this than I was at identifying the emotional architecture beneath the rational surface. I'd learned to take the question seriously even when I didn't have an answer. They just stopped existing, I said. No trace, no evidence they were ever there past the trailhead. And there's this thing, this feature right there in the area, and it's doing something no one can explain, and I found it, and no one seems to think that matters. Does it matter? I don't know. That's why it's bothering me. She reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were warm from the bowl. I love that you care about this. I need you to also care about the things that are in this room. She meant herself. She meant the pregnancy effort. She meant the life we were building. She was right to say it, and she said it without accusation, which is one of the things I've always loved about her, the ability to name a need without weaponizing it. I do, I said. Then find a boundary for this. Give it a shape. Don't let it just expand. I told her I would. I told myself I meant it. Dr. Chandrasekaran sent her analysis 4 days later. Her email was 3 paragraphs long, professional, restrained. She said that my coordinates fell within a zone her 2012 survey had flagged as having elevated resonance amplitude. She said the thermal data I described was consistent with convective airflow through a fracture network connected to a void at depth. She said, and this is the sentence I kept coming back to, the resonance signature at this location is among the strongest in the dataset and exhibits a periodicity that we were unable to attribute to any known seismic or atmospheric source. Periodicity, a rhythm, a pattern in the sound that wasn't caused by earthquakes, wasn't caused by wind, wasn't caused by anything they could identify. I printed the email and put it in a folder. I put the folder in my desk drawer. I went to work. I did the budget proposal. I scheduled recertification sessions. I replaced the batteries in 12 GPS units and reorganized the rope locker and attended a county commissioners meeting about next year's helicopter contract. I did my job. At night, I lay next to Ava and listened to the house settle and thought about warm air coming out of granite and 4 people who had stopped existing. In November, Keiko Oshiro emailed me. She'd gotten my address from a contact at the Forest Service. Her email was brief and precise. She said she understood the search was suspended. She said she was not contacting me in an official capacity. She said she had received her brother's personal effects from the vehicle and had found In the center console, a small notebook he always carried. Most of it was mundane grocery lists, phone numbers, a sketch of a climbing route. But on the last page with writing, dated the morning they entered the trailhead, he had written a single line. M says she can hear something from the ridge. Says it's been going since we got here. M was Maya, his wife. Below that, in slightly different pen pressure, as if written at a different time. Me too now. Keiko asked if this meant anything to me. She said the notebook had no further entries. She said the police had not considered it significant. She asked if I had any information I hadn't included in the official report. I sat at my desk in the loading bay and read the email 3 times. Outside, the first snow was falling, not sticking yet, just drifting across the parking lot in diagonal lines. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. Danielle was in her office with the door closed. I replied to Keiko. I told her the truth, that I had found a geological feature in the search area that produced an unusual sound, that I had reported it to the Forest Service, and that no investigation of it was currently planned. I told her I did not know if it was connected to her brother's disappearance. I told her I was sorry. She wrote back within the hour. She said she was coming to Jackson. She wanted to see the feature. I should have said no. I should have told her the search area was at elevation and the conditions were deteriorating, and that even if we could reach the site, looking at a crack in a talus field would give her no answers. I should have told her what Danielle had told me, to let it go. I told her I would take her. We went the first weekend of December. Ava knew. She didn't try to stop me, but the morning I left, she stood in the kitchen doorway with her coffee and said, "This is the shape you're giving it?" "This is the last trip," I said. "You don't know that." She was right. I didn't. Keiko met me at the trailhead at 7 a.m. She was small, precise, dressed in technical gear that looked new. She had her brother's notebook in a Ziploc bag in her chest pocket. She didn't make small talk. I liked her for that. The hike in was brutal. December in the winds is not the same as October in the winds. The snow was knee-deep in places. The trail buried, the temperature never climbing above 15 degrees. We used snowshoes and moved slowly. What had been a 4-hour hike was now a 7-hour slog. By the time we reached the lower lake, the light was going. We camped. I set up both tents while Keiko boiled water on the stove. We ate freeze-dried meals in silence, sitting on our packs in the snow, the mountains around us black against a sky that was almost purple with cold. The stars were there again, that same ruthless clarity. "Thank you for doing this," she said. "You don't have to thank me." "I know. I'm doing it anyway." She looked at me across the blue flame of the stove. "Everyone else has stopped. The police, the Forest Service, even my parents. They're already mourning. They've decided it's a death. It may be. I know, but there's no evidence it's a death. There's no evidence of anything. How do you mourn an absence?" I didn't have an answer. In the morning, we climbed to the talus field. The snow was shallower here. The wind had scoured the exposed rock, leaving only thin crusts in the gaps between boulders. The slot was still there. The warm air was still flowing out of it, and in the cold December air, it was visible a faint plume of vapor rising from the gap in the rock, like breath. Keiko saw it and stopped. "That's it? That's it?" She walked toward it slowly. She knelt in front of the opening and held her hand in the warm air. She stayed like that for a long time. I watched from a few yards back, giving her space. Then she put her ear to the opening. I saw her body change. Not dramatically a stiffening, a slight forward lean, the quality of attention shifting from deliberate to involuntary. She stayed with her ear to the rock for what felt like a full minute. When she pulled back, her face was different. Not frightened, not grief-stricken. Something I couldn't name. "There's a rhythm," she said. "I know." "It sounds like..." She stopped. She looked at the rock, then at me, then back at the rock. "It sounds organized." "I know." "How long has this been here?" "I don't know." Dr. Chandrasekharan's data is from 2011. It was active then. "Since before they came?" "Almost certainly." She stood up. She brushed snow off her knees. She looked at the slot for another long moment, then turned to me and said something I have not stopped thinking about. He wrote that Maya could hear it from the trailhead. That's 6 miles. I looked at her. The math landed in my stomach before my brain caught up. They heard it before they started hiking, she said. And they walked toward it. We descended in silence. On the hike out, Keiko fell behind several times, and each time I waited, and each time she caught up without comment. She was not struggling with the terrain. She was listening. I could see it in the way she tilted her head, the way she paused at certain points and turned slowly, like an antenna seeking a signal. At the trailhead, loading the truck, she said, "I'm going to hire someone, a geophysicist or an acoustician, someone who can tell me what's making that sound and where it goes. That's expensive. I know what it costs." She drove back to her motel. I drove home. Ava was asleep. I stood in the kitchen in the dark and drank a glass of water and noticed that my hands were shaking, which they had not done on the mountain. Monday morning, Danielle called me into her office again. The fluorescent was still off. The desk lamp made her face look older than it was. The Forest Service called, Dale Purcell. He said you took a civilian to the search area. I took a family member to a location on public land. Marcus, come on. She asked. She's his sister. She wanted to see where we looked. Danielle sat back in her chair. She folded her hands on the desk. I got a call this morning from the regional SAR coordinator. Not Dale, not the district, the regional office in Ogden. They asked me about you by name. They asked me about the geological feature you reported. They asked me how many times you'd been to the site. Twice. They asked me to tell you to stop. The word landed flat. Not threatening, not dramatic, just flat, like a door closing. Stop what? Going to the site, communicating with the family, pursuing the geological angle. They said the feature is known and has been reported before and is not connected to the disappearance, and that continued civilian attention to it creates a safety liability and a SAR resource liability. The feature is known? That's what they said? Known by whom? Since when? Because Dale Purcell had never heard of it when Marcus, I'm telling you what they told me. I'm asking you to hear it. I heard it. I heard all of it. I heard the part she was saying and the part underneath it, which was that someone above the district level had taken an interest in a geological anomaly I'd reported, not to investigate it, but to close it down. I heard the word known. Who specifically called you? I asked. The call came from the Intermountain Regional Office. I spoke to a woman named Aldridge. She identified herself as the Regional Safety Coordinator. There is no Regional Safety Coordinator. That's not a position. Danielle looked at me. I looked at her. The fluorescent above us was off, but I could hear it anyway. The ballast buzzing faintly, even with no current, the way they do in cold buildings. I'm going to ask you one more time, she said. Officially, as your supervisor. Stop going to the site. Stop contacting the family about the feature. Focus on your job. Can you do that? I said yes. I did it. For 3 months, I did it. Through December, through January, through February. I did my job. I went to recertification trainings. I wrote reports. I replaced equipment. Ava and I went to our appointments and charted her cycles and tried to make a child with the grim efficiency of people who have been trying long enough that hope has become a logistics problem. I slept. Not well, but I slept. In March, Keiko emailed me. She had hired a private acoustics consultant out of Boulder, a man named Harmon, who worked primarily on noise pollution assessment for mining operations. She'd paid him to go to the site in late February, when conditions were marginal but passable. He'd spent 2 days there with equipment I couldn't have afforded to rent. His findings were in a PDF she attached. I opened it at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. while Ava slept. The report was 12 pages, dense with spectrograms and waveform analyses. The summary said this: the acoustic emissions from the feature exhibited a fundamental frequency of 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic resonance frequency of the Earth's surface ionosphere cavity. This was not itself unusual. Many geological structures can produce vibrations at or near this frequency through mechanical resonance. What was unusual was the harmonic structure. The overtones did not follow the expected pattern for a resonating void. They were irregular, asymmetric, and Harmon used the word reluctantly, he noted. Responsive. Responsive. He described an experiment he'd conducted on the second day. He had played a tone through a portable speaker into the slot, a simple sine wave at 440 Hz, concert A, and recorded the result. The acoustic emissions from the feature had shifted, not to match the input frequency, but in a way that Harmon described as reactive adjustment. The rhythm changed. The harmonic structure reorganized, and then, over a period of approximately 90 seconds, it returned to its baseline pattern. He concluded that the feature was acoustically interactive and recommended further study by a team with geophysical expertise. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after reading that. The house was quiet. Ava's breathing was steady in the bedroom. Outside, the March wind moved through the bare trees with a sound like something being turned inside out. Responsive. I emailed Keiko. I said the report was remarkable. I said I thought she should send it to the Forest Service. I said I thought Harmon's findings warranted a formal investigation. She replied, I sent it 3 weeks ago. They acknowledged receipt. Nothing since. 2 weeks later, Keiko emailed again. Shorter this time. She said Harmon had gone back to the site on his own. He'd told his wife he was doing follow-up measurements for a client. He had not returned from the trailhead. His vehicle was found in the lot. His equipment was found at the base of the talus field, neatly packed. His pack was there. His food was there. His boots were there, placed side by side on a flat rock near the slot. His boots were there. She asked me what to do. I picked up the phone and called the Teton County SAR line, my own line, and reported a missing person at the Seneca Lake trailhead. Danielle answered. I gave her the information. I could hear the silence on her end getting heavier as she understood what I was telling her. Marcus, she said, I'm reporting a missing person. I understand. I'll contact the Forest Service. Danielle, his boots were at the slot. He took his boots off before he went in. The silence was different now. Not heavy, empty. I'll contact the Forest Service, she said again, and hung up. The search for Harmon lasted 3 days. Smaller team, limited scope. They focused on the drainage. They found everything Keiko had described. They found the slot. They noted the warm air. They did not enter the formation. The report I was not supposed to see, but did, because Paul Finn had access, and Paul Finn was also not sleeping, noted that the warm air from the slot had increased in temperature since my October measurement. It was now 58 degrees. The ambient temperature was 22. A 36-degree differential. The report also noted that the acoustic emissions, which the search team had recorded, exhibited a complex periodic structure that supervisory geologist Dr. E. Tavares described as unlike any known geological acoustic phenomenon in the literature. Harmon was classified as missing. The search was suspended after 3 days. The slot was flagged as a safety hazard. A closure order was issued for a half-mile radius around the feature, which placed it off-limits to the public. Closed. Not investigated. Closed. In April, Ava and I learned that the latest round of treatment had not worked. We sat in the clinic in Idaho Falls, the nearest fertility specialist was 90 miles away, and listened to the doctor explain the numbers and the options with the practiced gentleness of someone who does this conversation 8 times a day. Ava held my hand. Her grip was steady. Mine wasn't. On the drive home, crossing the pass, she said, I think we should stop. She meant the treatment. She meant the trying. She said it calmly, looking out the window at the mountains, and I could see that she'd been thinking about it for longer than this car ride, probably longer than this month. Okay, I said. Okay, as in you agree? Or okay, as in you're not fighting me? Both. She looked at me. You're relieved. I'm sad. You're both. Yeah. We drove in silence for a while. The mountains went by. They were beautiful, and I couldn't feel it. The thing I'm going to ask you, she said, is hard, and I know it's hard, and I'm asking anyway. I waited. I need you to come back. All the way. I need whatever part of you is in that drainage to come back to this truck and stay here, because I can't do this. She gestured at the space between us, at the road, at the life, with someone who is mostly here. I need all of you, or I need to know that all of you isn't available. It's not about the drainage. It's about the drainage. It's been about the drainage since September. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that my distraction was about the case, about the families, about the professional obligation to find people who were lost. But Ava was the person who could see the architecture beneath the surface, and she was looking at mine, and she was telling me what she saw. You aren't trying to find them anymore, she said. You want to know what's down there? That's different. That's not your job. That's a need. And I need to know if it's bigger than this. I drove. The road curved. The mountains were indifferent. It's not bigger than this, I said. Then stop. Okay. Not like last time. Actually stop. I stopped. I stopped emailing Keiko. I stopped reading about thermal anomalies. I stopped lying awake, calculating the rate of temperature increase in the slot and what the curve would look like, extrapolated over months and years. I stopped thinking about the word responsive. I stopped thinking about 4 people in a pair of boots. I did this for 8 weeks. I was good at it. I was present with Ava. I was present at work. The spring season started and we had the usual calls, lost day hikers, a broken ankle on the Teton Crest, a kayaker on the Snake who'd wrapped his boat on a bridge piling. Normal work, urgent, useful, resolvable. I did it well. In June, Paul Fenn retired. There was a small party at a bar in town, 7 or 8 of us, some beers, a card signed by the volunteers. Paul was not sentimental. He shook hands, said thanks, and left early. In the parking lot, he caught my arm. You still thinking about the drainage? No. He looked at me the way Danielle looked at me, reading the unwritten page. I went back in May, he said. I stared at him. The temperature is 64 degrees now. Marcus, the sound is louder, and the slot is wider. Wider. By about 8 inches. The rock hasn't fractured. I don't know the word. The rock looks the same. But the space between the rocks is larger. As if they moved apart. Rock doesn't do that. I know. He let go of my arm. He looked at the mountains, which were still lit by the last sun, pink and gold and ancient. I found something else. Inside the first 10 feet, I didn't go further. I'm not stupid. There's a flat area, like a shelf, and on the shelf, there are objects, small ones. I couldn't reach them, but with a headlamp, I could see them. What objects? A phone, a water bottle, a hair elastic, and a ring. A wedding ring, Marcus, sitting on a shelf of granite, 10 feet inside a formation that didn't have a shelf last October. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, printed, not on a screen. He'd used a telephoto lens. The image was grainy but clear. A narrow shelf of pale granite, and on it, arranged with the neatness of items on a nightstand. A smartphone in a case, a green Nalgene bottle, a purple hair elastic, and a plain gold band. I didn't touch anything, he said. I didn't tell anyone. I'm telling you. Why? Because someone should know, and you're the one who found it. And I'm 63, and I'm done, and I don't want to be the one carrying this. He gave me the photograph. He got in his truck. He drove away. I stood in the parking lot, holding the photograph and feeling the specific kind of vertigo that comes from understanding that you are going to break a promise to someone you love, not because you want to, but because the alternative is knowing something that will eat you alive from the inside. I didn't tell Ava. I went back the following weekend. Alone. I told her I was doing a solo overnight on the Tetons, a conditioning hike. Preseason. She believed me because she wanted to believe me, or because she'd already calculated that this moment was coming and had decided to let it arrive on its own terms rather than forcing a confrontation that would only accelerate it. The hike in was fast. Summer now, the snow gone except in the highest shadows. The drainage was green with new growth, the lakes full, the stream running hard. The Talus field was the same. The slot was not. Paul was right. It was wider. Not 8 inches wider, more like 14. The opening that had been a tight squeeze in October was now a comfortable doorway. The warm air was a steady current, and the temperature on my thermometer read 68. The sound was audible from 6 feet away without putting your ear to the rock. That low, rhythmic resonance, rising and falling, organized, responsive. I shined my headlamp inside. I could see the shelf Paul had described. The objects were there. Phone, bottle, elastic, ring. But there were more now. A second phone, a carabiner, a folded bandana, a single earring, and something I couldn't identify from the opening. Something pale and irregular, sitting at the back of the shelf, partly in shadow. The shelf itself was wrong, not the objects on it the shelf. It was smooth. Granite doesn't weather smooth underground. It fractures along crystal boundaries, creating rough, angular surfaces. This shelf looked polished, like it had been prepared. I stood at the entrance for a long time. The warm air moved past me, steadily out, always out, like an exhalation that never needed to inhale. The sound rose and fell. Rose and fell. I understood, standing there, what had happened to the Oshiro Marsh Group. I understood what had happened to Harmon. I understood it not because I had evidence that would survive a report, but because the understanding was in the sound itself, not as information, but as invitation. The rhythm was not a geological process. It was a door that breathed. And the people who heard it had walked through. I did not walk through. I stepped back. I took photographs. I recorded audio. I measured the temperature and the width of the opening and the distance to the shelf. I documented everything with the systematic care of someone who knows that documentation is the only alternative to action. Then I hiked out and drove to the Forest Service District office in Jackson and asked to speak to the duty ranger. I was told the office was closed. It was Sunday. I went to the Teton County Sheriff's Office and asked to file a report. A deputy took my statement. He wrote it down politely. He looked at the photographs politely. He said he would forward it to the appropriate agency. On Monday, I went to work. Danielle was in the field on a call. I sat at my desk in the loading bay and wrote a detailed report, 6 pages, with photographs, audio files, GPS coordinates, temperature data, and a timeline of every observation I'd made since September. I emailed it to the Forest Service District Office, the regional office in Ogden, the Teton County Sheriff, and the Wyoming Geological Survey. The Geological Survey wrote back first. They thanked me for the report and said they would evaluate the observation for potential inclusion in future field assessments. The district office did not respond. The regional office responded 3 days later with a single paragraph from someone named Aldridge, the same name Danielle had mentioned, stating that the feature was within the existing closure area and under ongoing monitoring, and that no additional civilian reporting is needed at this time. Under ongoing monitoring. By whom? There were no instruments at the site, no cameras, no data loggers, no footprints in the drainage except mine and Paul's. I called the regional office. I asked for Aldridge. I was told she was unavailable. I left a message. I called again the next day. Unavailable. I called 4 more times over the following week. On the 5th call, a different voicemail, calm, with the flat affect of someone reading from guidance, told me that my report had been received and assessed and that the feature was being managed at the appropriate level and that continued inquiries from non-agency personnel were not productive to the management process. I asked what the management process was. He said he was not authorized to discuss management details with non-agency personnel. I asked if anyone had entered the formation. He said the closure order prohibited entry. I asked if agency personnel had entered the formation. He said he was not authorized to discuss operational details. I hung up. I sat in the loading bay. The fluorescent light buzzed above me. I could hear it oscillating at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious attention. And I thought about the Schumann resonance and the harmonic structure that didn't match any known geology, and the word responsive. That evening, I showed Ava the photographs. All of them. I told her everything. The October trip, the December trip with Keiko, the emails with Dr. Chandrasekaran, the Harmon report, Paul's discovery, my own return. Everything I'd been carrying for 9 months. She looked at the photographs for a long time. She looked at the one of the shelf with the objects. She set the phone down on the table between us. "Those are their things," she said. "I think so." The ring. Maya Oshiro wore a plain gold band. It's in the missing person description. And the boots. Harmon's boots. Outside the entrance. She was quiet. The house was quiet. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and stopped. "You promised me you'd stop," she said. "I know. And you didn't." "No. And you're not going to." I looked at her. She was not angry. She was doing what she always did, seeing the architecture, seeing the load-bearing walls and the parts that were cosmetic and the parts that had already cracked. "I don't think I can," I said. "I know," she said. "That's what scares me." She didn't leave. She didn't ask me to leave. She went to bed. I sat at the table. I looked at the photographs on my phone. I looked at the shelf with its neat arrangement of objects: phone, bottle, elastic, ring, carabiner, bandana, earring, the pale thing in the back that I couldn't identify. Arranged with care, like offerings, like a welcome. The next morning, I was terminated. Not from the SAR team from the county. Danielle called me at 7 a.m. and told me the county administrator had received a request from the Forest Service Regional Office to discontinue my involvement in any capacity related to the Bridger-Teton closure area. The county, which depended on the Forest Service for the helicopter contract and a dozen other cooperative agreements, had complied. My position was being eliminated in a restructuring. I would receive 2 weeks severance. Danielle's voice on the phone was steady and furious and carefully controlled. "I fought this," she said. "I want you to know that. I know. They're wrong. Whatever this is, however they're handling it, they're wrong. I know. But I can't protect you from the county. I don't have that authority." "I know, Danielle." A pause. Then, "Marcus, whatever you do next, be careful. These people don't want you looking, and they have the ability to make looking very difficult." I packed my desk. It took 15 minutes. 4 years of work fit into a single box. A mug, some photos, a copy of the intake form I'd designed, a pair of sunglasses, the folder with Dr. Chandrasekaran's email. I carried it to my truck and drove home. Ava was at work. I sat in the living room with the box on the floor next to me and stared at the wall and tried to understand the shape of what was happening. I'd found a geological anomaly. I'd reported it through proper channels. I'd been told to stop. I'd continued. I'd been fired. The sequence was clear. The logic was not. If the feature was harmless, just a thermal anomaly in granite, a curiosity for future study, there was no reason to fire me. There was no reason for the regional office to intervene. There was no reason for a position called Regional Safety Coordinator that didn't exist in any org chart I could find. If the feature was dangerous, a genuine hazard, something that the agency understood and was managing, then the appropriate response was to investigate it, to send a team to determine what had happened to 5 missing people, not to close the area and silence the person who found it. The only logic that fit was that someone knew what the feature was, knew what it did, and had decided that the correct response was containment through closure and silence rather than investigation and disclosure. And the only reason to choose that response was if investigation itself was the danger, because the thing was responsive, because it reacted to attention, because the people who went to it didn't come back. And because I thought about this for a long time, sitting in my living room, the objects on the shelf were placed there by something that wanted them to be found, by something that understood that a wedding ring and a phone and a water bottle would bring more people to the opening, by something that had learned from 5 visitors what draws a human being toward a hole in the ground: curiosity, love, grief, the need to know. I'm writing this from the kitchen table. It's September again, 1 full year since the Oshiro Marsh group walked into the Wind Rivers and didn't come back. Ava is in the next room. She's reading. We are still together, though the shape of our togetherness has changed in ways I don't fully understand yet. She knows what I'm writing. She asked me not to include her name. I'm including it because she deserves to be seen as what she is, the person who tried to keep me here. I haven't been back to the drainage. Not because I was ordered to stop. Not because I lost my job. Not because of Ava, though she is reason enough. I haven't been back because 3 weeks ago, sitting in this kitchen at 2 a.m, unable to sleep, I heard it. Not from outside. Not from the walls. From the floor. From the foundation of this house. A low rhythmic resonance, rising and falling over intervals of 8 to 10 seconds, the same frequency, the same periodicity, the same organized, patient, responsive sound. I got down on my knees and put my ear to the floorboards, and the wood was warm. I stayed there for a long time. The sound rose and fell, rose and fell. And I understood with the specific terminal clarity of someone who has been studying a phenomenon for a year and has finally identified the variable he missed, that I had never needed to go back to the drainage. The drainage was coming to me. It's under this house now, or it's approaching, or it's always been here. And I've only just become someone who can hear it. I don't know which. The temperature of our crawl space has risen 4 degrees since I started monitoring it. Ava hasn't noticed. The dog next door, who used to bark every evening, has been silent for a week. I have not reported this. There is no one to report it to. The people who told me to stop looking were not trying to protect the public. They were trying to protect the phenomenon's patience. Every person who approaches it, documents it, responds to it. Every Harmon, every Keiko, every me teaches it something about what we will walk toward and why. And now, it doesn't need us to walk. It knows enough to come to where we are. I can feel it through the soles of my feet right now. Warm, rhythmic, not hostile, not patient, just present. The way the ground is always present beneath everything, holding everything up, asking nothing, and accepting without limit everything that comes to rest upon it. Ava just called from the other room. She asked what I was doing. I said I was writing. She said, come to bed. The floor is warm. The sound is steady. I should go to her. I should walk across this warm floor and lie down next to the person I love and close my eyes and sleep. But I think if I put my ear to the pillow, I will hear it there too. And I think if I hear it there, in the place where I sleep, in the place where I am closest to not being conscious, I will not be able to stop myself from listening. And I think listening now is the same as answering. And I think answering is the same as opening a door. I cannot close. The warmth is rising through the floorboards. It feels like a house that loves you. It feels like being expected. Ava is calling again. I'm going to go to her now.